so redonkulous. I mean, the whole hope springs eternal, the Fed's going to pivot, the Fed's going to pivot. My stonks are going up. Yeah, baby. This is so dumb. I mean, this is dumb. Why should the Fed cut interest rates? Why? Right? What is the rationale for cutting interest rates? The reason you cut interest rates is because an economy is slowing at a rapid pace and you need to stimulate the economy. All right? No one's talking about that. Everybody's talking about the no landing and everything's great and we're reaccelerating. And
the Federal Reserve is unlikely to raise interest rates at its October 31 to November 1 meeting, Goldman Sachs strategists wrote on Saturday, while also forecasting the U.S. central bank would lift its economic growth projections when policymakers gather next week. In November, we think that further labor market rebalancing, better news on inflation, and the likely upcoming Q4 growth pothole will convince more participants that the FOMC, Federal Open Market Committee, can forego a final hike this year, as we think it ultimately will, investment banks strategists wrote in a report. Goldman strategists, however, wrote that they expect the Fed's dot plot, which reflects policymakers' interest rate projections and will be updated on Wednesday, to show a narrow 10-9 majority still penciling in one more hike, if only to preserve flexibility for now, they wrote. As market participants try to gauge the Fed's monetary policy trajectory, some big investors, including JP Morgan Asset Management and Janus Henderson Investors, have said the central bank is likely done hiking rates, following the most aggressive monetary policy tightening cycle in decades. Mark Yusko shares his view on interest rates and inflation, sharing how it affects the average population and the macro implications of sustained inflation. Let us now get into the video. Also, make sure to hit the like button, subscribe, and drop your comments as you watch. Enjoy.
When Krugman says something, the opposite is going to happen. But he's like, oh, we've had, epic prints of economic activity. On what planet are you talking about? No, we're not in depth of recession or depression, which, a year and a half ago, there would have been many people, including myself even, that would have thought that was a potentiality. So, but we are not in this big expansion. I mean, yeah, the GDP came out positive instead of negative, but then we revised it down and probably gets revised down again. But it's not bad, right? It's right at stall speed. If we're going to run at 2%, again, that's not bad, but it's not great. That's to claim that we have some. I can't remember the exact word he used, but it was literally hyperbolic. Like, this is the best economic data we've ever seen. I'm like, not even close. The difference between inflation and core inflation. Inflation excluding food and energy. And I used to make this joke, like, as long as you don't put gas in your car, heat or cool your house, send your kids to college, go to the grocery store, or, use medical care, you're right, there's no inflation. But if you happen to do any of those other things, which is life, there's inflation, but it's not inflation. You and I have talked about this. It's currency devaluation. And that's why I think there's so much of this, 3-card Monty and, hide the whatever. It's because people don't want you to pay attention to the reality. What Voorhees was talking about, what Robert Breedlove was talking about, actually Ayn Rand was talking about, decades ago, is when men, and it is men, a small number of men, control the issuance of the currency, they will destroy it. And that's exactly what's happening right before our eyes. And we are on the precipice, actually, I believe, we actually are on the precipice of losing control. Like Zimbabwe, Venezuela, Argentina is going through this, a pre-election cycle, and there's this, radical guy, and he's, pretty good shot to win, which would actually be a really good thing. But there's a funny post. Someone said, I think it was Bianco, actually, but it was Bianco. I love Jimmy. And he said, this is an economic announcement. Argentina holds key rate at 118%. 118%? Think about that. We're whining because rates have gone back to 5.5%, 6%. 118%? That is a broken economy. And again, from bad leadership and corruption. And it's from, now they actually had a woman because Christina was involved, but bad people doing bad stuff. And if you are an average person in Argentina and you didn't convert your pesos into Bitcoin, you're screwed. I mean, and Wences, I wish I could remember where he did the original speech, but Wences Casares does this amazing speech about his aha moment with Bitcoin because he watched his family lose everything 3 times. Not once, not twice, 3 times, where inflation spiked to quad digits and the government basically, people at the top get super rich and everybody else gets wiped out. It's what happened in Venezuela. It's what's happened in, Turkey. Erdogan's living in a palace and the people are having to pay really expensive prices for stuff to live. And so this is a really big deal. It's a really big deal. And I think your point of, we're going to just change the metrics and get everyone to believe that this thing that we told them it's good for them, inflation. Remember, they told us inflation's good for us. Again, on what planet is a policy that steals half your purchasing power over 30 years good for me? Just generally speaking, if you're going to take half my purchasing power away over time, why is that good for me? That's not good for me. What's good for me is giving me something that appreciates rather than depreciates, that increases in value as opposed to devalues. That would be good for me.
Hardline Republicans want offsets for spending on disaster relief and Ukraine aid included in any CR, as well as tighter immigration and border security policies. Without these spending cuts, we're in no vote. I say we, me and a good many others, Representative Ralph Norman, a Freedom Caucus member, said in an interview. I'd rather shut the government down. According to Mark Yusko, the government has no reason to keep spending billions of dollars on Ukraine aid when there are more pressing concerns facing the economy. He further highlights some core inflationary indicators and why it is very hard for the average man to tread these waters unscathed. Let us now get back into the video.
We give half of what we earn to a centralized authority to do with it whatever they want with no accountability whatsoever. And then if they overspend, they just print more. If you and I overspend, we go to jail, right? You don't pay your bills, you get evicted from your house, you get arrested as a criminal. It's not quite that extreme, but there used to be a debtor's prison. Every transaction has the threat of being denied. Every single one. Now, and this is a really good point that Eric made, that most of the time permission is granted, but it might not be. If you were in Cyprus, I talk this with bank, right? Put your money in the bank. It's not your money. It's their money. It's not yours. You have an IOU, and that IOU is good 99.99% of the time. But if you happen to be in Cyprus in 2012 and you woke up and went to the bank, you got 25 cents on the dollar. No explanation. No, I'm sorry. No recourse, right? You can't argue. That IOU was canceled. And the same thing with our money, right? Is 246 years to print 10 trillion. And then we print 10 trillion, 244 years. And then in 2, we print 10 trillion, which means that
not great.
The price of things that we need, and this is the insidious part, right? If you're at the top, you don't care because you can afford it. If you're in the middle and the bottom, you care a lot because you got to pay your rent and you got to pay for food and you got to pay your taxes. Well, now, okay, I can trim going to Applebee's, and then I won't be able to sing the song Fancy, which it's kind of catchy. Then you can trim going to the movies, and AMC stock can collapse. And you can trim taking that exotic vacation, and then the airline stocks go down. But at the end, you can't really trim all your food. The consumer's so strong, so resilient.
Yeah.
That's what the headlines are going to say. And
Yeah.
the fact that no one pulls up this chart and says, wait a minute, you're telling me that retail sales beat expectations. Now, this one actually says because Americans are paying more for gasoline, but the other headlines don't talk about that. They're just like, hey, the consumer is strong. Paying more for gasoline because of dumb policy decisions and the whims of Saudi is not a strong consumer. It's just not. And the fact that I have to, keyword have to, spend more to get places, like if you drive to work, okay, you have to buy gasoline. You don't have a choice. And it's so frustrating that that's going to be spun as a positive. There's nothing positive about that. Just not.
The U.S. House of Representatives returned last week for an expected political brawl over spending cuts and impeachment that could paralyze the Republican-controlled chamber as Congress struggles to avoid a government shutdown. The House and the Democratic-controlled Senate are due to be in session for about 12 days before funding expires on September 30, leaving little time to agree on a package of 12 appropriations bills that can pass each chamber and win Democratic President Joe Biden's signature. The main bone of contention among House Republicans is in demand by roughly 36 members of the hardline House Freedom Caucus to cut spending for fiscal 2024 of $1.47 trillion, about $120 billion less than Biden and Republican House Speaker Kevin McCarthy agreed in May. The White House and Senate leaders, including top Republican Mitch McConnell, have rejected that demand. That dispute and other hardline demands, including opposition to Ukraine aid and calls for an impeachment inquiry against Biden, could imperil efforts to pass a short-term stopgap known as a Continuing Resolution, or CR, which would keep federal agencies afloat while lawmakers debate full-scale appropriations. Everything's coming to a head after a long recess, Republican Representative Kelly Armstrong told Reuters, referring to this 6-week-long House summer break that ends Tuesday. We're a pretty diverse caucus with a 5-vote majority, so threading the needle is difficult to do. McCarthy's 8-month-old speakership could be threatened if he seeks Democratic support to avoid a shutdown or fails to move forward with an impeachment inquiry that former President Donald Trump's House allies are seeking despite a lack of votes. Political brinkmanship over the debt ceiling has already prompted the Fitch rating agency to downgrade U.S. debt to AA+ from its top-notch AAA designation, partly because of repeated down-to-the-wire negotiations that threaten the government's ability to pay its bills. White House spokesperson Andrew Bates warned that failure to enact $24 billion in supplemental funding for Ukraine and $16 billion for disaster-stricken U.S. communities in states including Hawaii and Florida could put lives at risk while delaying money to combat the deadly opioid fentanyl. What do you think of Mark Yusko's stance on government spending? Should the U.S. keep sending aid to Ukraine? Let us know your thoughts in the comment section. Also, don't forget to give us a like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Thanks for watching.